A Shark Tank contestant just pled guilty to some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, and the judge in the case threw out the plea deal the defendant worked out with the prosecution because he felt the crimes committed were too vile to let this guy off so easy. The individual I'm referring to is Nate Holzapfel, who I briefly mentioned in a video a month ago, but since that video he has now pled guilty in court, and after doing some digging, I was shocked at just how vile this guy truly is. So in this video, let's take a closer look at Nate, the Shark Tank criminal. Nate had his first taste of fame when he appeared on season 4 of Shark Tank when he presented the product Mission Belt Company that he was co-founder of. The belt had a unique design of having no holes and using a zip tie-like feature to stay secure around you. The belt could be adjusted to a 1 centimeter fit, while traditional belts with holes wouldn't always have a perfect fit. While most of the sharks liked the concept, most felt they weren't the right partner for the company, and only Daymond John made an offer, which was $50,000, in exchange for 37.5% of company ownership. The deal paid off for Nate and his company when the episode aired, and they sold over $1 million in belts in just a single month. Since then, the company has continued to grow and has had partnerships with the NBA, as well as the NHL, and many college teams as well. The company now regularly pulls in millions in sales every year, and has shown no sign of slowing down. All the success unfortunately went to Nate's head, and it started him down a dark path that now ultimately will lead him to spending years in jail. Following the hyper success of Mission Belt, Daymond and Nate began to work closely together on other Shark Tank projects. Nate was put in charge of running the websites of many of Daymond's future deals on the tank, including Bubba's Baby Back Ribs Company, which I talked about in a past video. Many of the contestants that Daymond made work with Nate felt sketched out by the guy, with Brian White, who ran the company Garage Door Lock, that also appeared on Shark Tank, reached out to Daymond after meeting with Nate and told Daymond, if you know what is good for you, you would keep your distance from this guy. Nate eventually showed his true colors when, according to the Bakers, he drained their business bank account of nearly all of their funds, leaving them in shock. Unfortunately, this was just the start of Nate's descent into fraud. Wanting a bigger piece of the pie, Nate decided to take the Tony Robbins approach and began to sell himself as a business guru that sold courses teaching others how to be successful. He did all of this through a website he created with the cringy name of thenatestateofmind.com. While this website is no longer up, you can still find some old images from the site, including this laughable one I found for the Magic Pitch, which appears to be one of the courses he taught. With Nate feeling like he was on top of the world, he eventually made a huge mistake when he scammed the famous interviewer Larry King. Nate apparently had connections to someone close to Larry King and was able to convince Larry to do a mock interview of Nate. Nate never appeared on Larry's show, and before agreeing to do the mock interview, Nate agreed that the footage shot would only be used for a promotional clip reel that Nate was going to use to convince a media company to do a TV show about him. This clip was never supposed to be used in any other way. Nate, being the con artist that he was, quickly went against his word and started using the Larry King clip all over the internet to promote his website and courses. On top of that, Nate began making up fake quotes, with one stating that Larry King loves Nate because Nate makes everyone feel like they are the most important person in the room. Larry King eventually had enough of having his name falsely attached to promoting Nate's products and ended up suing Nate in 2019. Just a few months later, Larry King won a default judgment against Nate to the tune of $250,000. If you remember from earlier in the story, I mentioned that Nate's company Mission Belt Co. was now pulling in millions of dollars a year, so a $250,000 judgment against Nate really shouldn't have hurt him that much, but that's where things start to take an interesting turn. It turns out that Mission Belt Co. and Nate parted ways just a few years after they appeared on Shark Tank. No reason was ever given as to why this was, so we don't know if Nate did something to upset his business partners, but once this came to light, it started to become more clear why Nate needed to make money selling sleazy online courses. The $250,000 was more money than Nate had to fork over, and this ultimately led Nate to fall further into scams and eventually led him to commit some truly heinous crimes against women that he was dating. In early 2020, Nate started dating a recently divorced woman who had a difficult life after surviving breast cancer and taking care of her adult disabled child. Nate wooed her and told her he was going to help her get her life back on track. Nate was able to con the woman into signing over the title of her home worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to an LLC that Nate owned named Save My House LLC. With Nate now the legal owner of the home, he was able to sell it and received over $200,000 in profit from the sale. Nate used the majority of the funds to pay off what was left of his legal debts to Larry King, and then used the remaining funds to buy himself luxury items, which included multiple high-end guns and loads of ammunition. He reportedly only paid the lady whose house he stole $11,000 after using most of the money on himself. The woman Nate scammed eventually reported him to the police, who then opened an investigation. The cops found that Nate had a pattern of scamming women, and they found another victim a few months later who Nate met on Tinder, and was wooing her to try and convince her to give him $50,000, which she had received from her late husband's life insurance policy. Nate reportedly told her he would help her invest her money so she could live like a gold girl. Now, it may be hard to believe, but during this entire time he was wooing and scamming women out of money, Nate was actually married and had a family that included several children. The entire time, he never let any of the women know what was going on, and was secretly carrying on multiple affairs and con games behind everyone's back. After all this came to light, the police eventually arrested Nate in October of 2021 and charged him with 6 counts of communications fraud, 3 counts of theft by deception, 4 counts of forcible sexual abuse, theft, being an unlicensed broker, and 4 counts of lewdness. Now, after all those charges, I think pretty much everyone expected Nate to get many years behind bars. What he did to those women was beyond disgusting, and some of the details I can't even cover in this video, or it would get taken down off YouTube. Unfortunately, Nate apparently had an ace up his sleeve, and he was able to convince the district attorney to give him an amazing deal. Nate agreed to plead guilty to several of the fraud and battery charges, and in exchange, all other charges would be dropped, and Nate did not have to serve any jail time or register as a sex offender. This was an amazing deal for Nate, and going into court to give his guilty plea and then go home, it seemed like a giant weight had been lifted off his shoulders after receiving such an amazing deal. Unfortunately for Nate, the judge in the case had other plans and threw out the deal he had struck with the prosecution and proceeded to send Nate to jail after his guilty plea, with how much prison time he would have to serve being determined at a later date.
Nate Holzapfel admitted to fraud and sexual misconduct in a deal meant to keep him out of prison and off the sex offender registry.
As part of our Failure to Protect series, KSL investigator Daniela Rivera examines that deal and the surprise move by the judge to overwrite it.
Unfortunately, the way this system works is that you do get a little bit hung before you're even tried. Innocent until proven guilty in America, and in part, thanks to KSL.
Well, you pleaded guilty. That's what 44-year-old Nate Holzapfel had to say as he walked into a Utah County courtroom expecting to walk back out a free man after his sentencing.
Court's indicating that it's not going to follow the recommendation as presented, then Mr. Holzapfel has a right to withdraw his guilty pleas.
He does not have a right to withdraw his guilty pleas.
Lowe sentenced Holzapfel to serve 1 to 15 years in prison, calling his crimes treachery and abuse with shocking, life-altering impacts to the women he preyed on.
I am thrilled about the outcome today.
Survivors in the case say they finally feel heard.
That man is now going to prison, and that was not the case this morning, as he's in cuffs and I am finally free.
As part of Nate's deal, if he pled guilty but the judge denied the plea deal he had worked out, Nate was supposed to be able to revoke his guilty plea, but the judge refused to allow this to happen. I'm no lawyer, so I don't really understand how the judge was allowed to do that, and I'm sure Nate's legal team will appeal the decision, but for now, Nate is rotting away in prison for his crimes. My hope is that Nate spends a long time there, as his crimes were truly heinous. The original plea deal he worked out for no prison time reeks of corruption, and I hope the district attorney that agreed to those ridiculous terms is looked at as well. As I showed in that news clip, the victims in Nate's crime seemed to feel justice was served after Nate's deal was thrown out, and my hope is that all of Nate's victims can now feel much safer knowing this con artist is now behind bars. Let me know in the comments below if you feel justice was served in this case, or if you think Nate will eventually wiggle his way out of his charges with a new plea deal. Ultimately, Nate appears to be the biggest con artist that has ever appeared on the Shark Tank show, and is another example of just how corrupt some of the people on that show truly are.